I don't want a relationship anymore. You've heard people say this, maybe you've said it yourself. And it sounds empowering, doesn't it? Independent, self-aware, evolved. I'm focused on myself now. I don't need anyone. I'm happy alone. Brother, I've heard this exact phrase hundreds of times in counseling, and I've learned to ask one simple question. Did you not want a relationship before you tried and failed? Or did you stop wanting relationships after they didn't work out? The answer reveals everything. Because here's what most people don't understand. Your brain is incredibly good at protecting you from pain. So good that it can convince you that you don't want the very thing you can't have. It's not strength, it's not enlightenment. It's a defense mechanism. And it's one of the most powerful psychological patterns humans have. Let me show you what's really happening. When someone says they don't want relationships anymore, one of two things is true. Option 1, they genuinely prefer solitude. They've always been this way. They're introverted, self-sufficient, and relationships feel like obligations rather than enhancements to their life. These people exist. They're rare, but they exist. Option 2, they wanted relationships. They tried. They failed repeatedly. They got hurt. And their brain, trying to protect them from more pain, convinced them that they never wanted relationships in the first place. Option 2 is about 90% of the people I counsel who claim to not want relationships. Here's how you know the difference. Ask about their past. People who genuinely don't want relationships never really wanted them. They didn't spend their 20s and 30s dating, hoping to find the one, getting excited about possibilities. People using defense mechanisms have a history, failed relationships, rejections, disappointments, heartbreak. And somewhere along the way, they made a decision, this isn't worth it anymore. But that decision doesn't come from strength, it comes from exhaustion, from protection, from a brain that's saying, if we pretend we don't want this thing we keep failing at, it won't hurt anymore. It's called adaptive preference formation. It's the psychological process where you adjust your preferences to match what's actually available to you. When relationships aren't working out, your brain adapts by making you not want them anymore. It's the same mechanism that makes prisoners adapt to prison life. Or poor people convince themselves they don't want wealth. It's not genuine preference. It's psychological protection disguised as preference. There's a famous thought experiment called the fox and the grapes. A fox sees grapes hanging high on a vine. He wants them. He jumps for them repeatedly. He can't reach them. After many failed attempts, he walks away saying, those grapes were probably sour anyway. The fox didn't actually determine the grapes were sour. He never tasted them. He decided they were sour because he couldn't have them. That decision protected his ego from the pain of failure. This is adaptive preference formation, and humans do this constantly. The woman who spent her 30s getting rejected says, I don't want a man anyway, I'm independent and happy. The man who couldn't get commitment says, relationships are prison, I'm free. The person who got hurt repeatedly says, all relationships are toxic, I'm better off alone. They're not describing genuine preferences, they're describing adaptations to unavailability. Here's how to test this. Imagine if everything changed tomorrow, if the perfect partner appeared, if relationships suddenly worked, if love was easy and pain-free. Would you still not want relationships? Or would you suddenly discover that you do want them after all? If the answer is, I'd want one if it was good, then you don't actually prefer being alone. You just prefer being alone to experiencing more disappointment and pain. That's not the same thing, that's protection. That's your brain saying, we can't handle more rejection, so let's convince ourselves we don't want what we can't successfully get. It's adaptive, it's understandable. But it's not genuine preference. It's a defense mechanism. Here's how the cycle works. Stage 1, desire. You want relationships. You try. You're open. You're hopeful. You believe in love and partnership. Stage 2, disappointment. It doesn't work. You get rejected, or you choose wrong, or it falls apart. You feel pain. You feel failure. Stage 3, repetition. This happens again and again. Each time reinforces a belief. Relationships don't work for me. Stage 4, protective withdrawal. Your brain, trying to protect you, starts building walls. It tells you, maybe you don't actually need relationships. Maybe you're better off alone. Stage 5, identity shift. You start identifying as someone who doesn't want relationships. You post about being independent, you talk about being happy alone, you convince yourself this is who you are. Stage 6, reinforcement. You surround yourself with content and people that validate this identity. You consume media about toxic relationships. You focus on horror stories. You find evidence that relationships are bad. Stage 7, defensive rigidity. Anyone who challenges this narrative, anyone who suggests you might be protecting yourself rather than expressing genuine preference gets shut down. Because questioning the defense mechanism triggers the pain it was built to avoid. This cycle is so powerful because it feels real. It feels like genuine preference. It feels like growth and self-awareness, but it's not. It's protection. And the proof is in what happens when you dig deeper. Ask someone who claims to not want relationships. Are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Do you feel connected? Do you feel seen and known? Usually the answer reveals loneliness hidden behind independence rhetoric, connection hunger disguised as contentment, the very human need for intimacy suppressed by defensive walls. So how do you know the difference? How do you distinguish genuine contentment from protective withdrawal? Genuine contentment has always preferred solitude. Even before rejection, doesn't post about being independent, doesn't need validation, isn't bitter about relationships or people, in relationships doesn't consume content about toxic relationships or relationship failures, feels genuinely fulfilled. Not just fine, has deep friendships and meaningful connections elsewhere, isn't lonely, is content. Protective withdrawal wanted relationships until they didn't work out, posts frequently about independence, and not needing anyone shows bitterness toward people in relationships, consumes content. Validating their choice to be alone, uses "I'm happy alone" as a mantra they repeat, often has shrinking social circles and shallow connections, is lonely, but won't admit it, gets defensive when questioned about relationship status. The key difference: genuine contentment doesn't need defending. Protective withdrawal needs constant reinforcement. If you have to keep telling yourself and others that you're happy alone, you're probably not. If you have to consume content validating your choice, it's probably not a choice. If you get angry when someone suggests you might want relationships, that anger is protecting something. People who are genuinely content don't post about it, don't talk about it constantly, don't need validation for it, they just live it quietly. People using defense mechanisms advertise their contentment because they're trying to convince themselves, not others. Be honest in the comments. Are you genuinely happy alone, or are you protecting yourself from more disappointment? There's no judgment either way. But self-awareness is the first step to truth. Keep watching. Here's what breaks my heart about this pattern. Behind the independence rhetoric, there's usually profound loneliness. The person who posts, "I don't need anyone," is eating dinner alone every night. The person who says, "I'm happy single," is spending weekends with Netflix because they have no one to see. The person who claims relationships are overrated is watching couples and feeling the ache they won't acknowledge. Humans are wired for connection. It's not optional, it's biological. Even the most introverted person needs meaningful connection with others. When that need isn't met, loneliness happens. But loneliness is painful. So the brain creates stories to make it hurt less. I'm not lonely, I'm independent. I don't want relationships, I want freedom. I'm not isolated, I'm self-sufficient. These stories help. They make the pain more bearable, but they don't eliminate the underlying need for connection. I've counseled people who maintained this narrative for years, convinced themselves they were happy alone. Then something cracks, a health scare, a holiday alone, seeing an ex happy with someone else, and the defense mechanism breaks. Suddenly they're devastated, admitting they're lonely, admitting they do want connection, admitting they've been lying to themselves for years. The loneliness was always there, they just got very good at not looking at it directly. And here's the tragedy. The years spent in defensive withdrawal are years that could have been spent working on actual relationship skills, learning from failures instead of avoiding the entire category, building connection instead of walls. The protection that felt necessary in the moment becomes a prison they can't escape, because you can't build a life on what you're avoiding. Ask yourself these questions honestly. 1. Did you always prefer being alone, or did you start preferring it after relationships failed? If it's the latter, it's adaptive, not genuine. 2. Do you feel genuinely fulfilled or just fine? Fine is not the same as fulfilled. Fine is tolerance, not contentment. 3. Do you get defensive when someone suggests you might want a relationship? Defensiveness reveals protection. Contentment doesn't need defending. 4. Do you post about being happy alone frequently? If you have to advertise it, you're trying to convince someone, usually yourself. 5. Are you bitter about people in relationships? Bitterness reveals wanting what you don't have, even if you won't admit it. 6. Do you feel lonely but tell yourself you're just independent? There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. Be honest about which one you're experiencing. 7. Would you want a relationship if it was guaranteed to work? If yes, then you don't actually prefer being alone. You prefer protection from pain. If you answered yes to most of these, you're likely using defensive withdrawal, not expressing genuine preference. And brother, there's no judgment in that. Protection is a normal response to pain, but calling protection a preference keeps you stuck in a pattern that's keeping you from what you actually want. If you recognize yourself in this pattern, here's what you need to understand. Acknowledging that you're using defense mechanisms doesn't mean you have to immediately pursue relationships. It just means you stop lying to yourself about why you're avoiding them. I want relationships, but I'm afraid is different from I don't want relationships. The first is honest, the second is protective. Start with honesty. Admit you're lonely if you're lonely. Admit you're afraid if you're afraid. Admit you want connection even if it hasn't worked out. Then decide what to do with that truth. Maybe you work on relationship skills. Maybe you process past hurt in therapy. Maybe you take small risks with low stakes. Or maybe you genuinely decide that solitude is better than the effort relationships require. That's valid too. But make that decision from awareness, not protection, from choice, not fear, because a life built on what you're avoiding is a half-life. And you deserve better than that. The people who are genuinely happy alone don't need to convince anyone. They don't post about it. They don't talk about it. They don't consume content validating their choice. They just live it, quietly, contentedly. If you're constantly defending your choice to be alone, it's probably not a choice, it's a protection. And brother, there's no shame in protection. Pain is real, rejection hurts, building walls makes sense. But call it what it is. Don't confuse survival mechanisms with preferences. Don't mistake defensive withdrawal for genuine contentment. Be honest with yourself about what you want and why you're not pursuing it. Because the first step to getting what you want is admitting you want it. Even if that admission makes you vulnerable, especially if that admission makes you vulnerable, that's where real growth begins. Drop a comment. Which category are you in? Genuinely content alone or protecting yourself from disappointment? This video is about self-awareness, not judgment. Sometimes recognizing our defense mechanisms is the first step toward actually getting what we want. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.